disability as
This meeting is being recorded.
wait a minute. What is this?
No, I started it late.
Okay,
This is not a good night for me, but Ginger, you're just, keep going. This is such enlightening for all of us.
the ADA defines disability as a physical, mental, cognitive, or sensory impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or that someone has there's a record of such an impairment, or there's a record of being treated as having such an impairment. So before the ADA became law, here's an example. I would ask a passerby for a favor as I sat in front of a store, maybe a 7-Eleven, and I'd say, would you mind going into the store and getting me a pack of gum? Because there was a curb and I couldn't get into that store. But after the ADA was passed, it felt really good to sit in front of that store and to demonstrate and say to the store owner that we made come out, you need to add a ramp so that I can get into your store. What that did was it took the burden away from me and it placed it on the business for denying me the right to shop at a public establishment. It also put the burden on that establishment to implement a remedy. That remedy for me would be adding a little ramp so that I'd be able to get in. So because of the ADA, I can now ride any bus or train in Chicago. That was a huge advantage and a huge step towards making me feel just like any other citizen that wanted to take public transportation. The ADA is comprised of 5 titles: employment, public transportation and state and local government services, public accommodations, telecommunications, and miscellaneous that comprise a lot of other things. I'm not going to go into those, but those are the 5 titles of the ADA. So here's a personal note. I'm proud to say that I got arrested in the rotunda of the Capitol in DC in the spring of 1990 for protesting and demonstrating for passage of the ADA. And I got arrested and I loved it. Therefore, I'm taking full credit for its passage. Anyway, while historic and sweeping at the time, the legislation has had many challenges and restrictions. Enforcement remains difficult as it's driven only by complaints. So if you're encountering discrimination, a person with a disability can file a lawsuit, which often takes years to resolve, with businesses often claiming an undue burden of cost. Congress and the White House have whittled away at the ADA and introduced legislation to make the law much harder to enforce. So now, about living with a disability. People with disabilities are sometimes described as heroes, a depiction that frankly makes us squirm. I think of a hero as someone who has a choice, who runs into a burning building to save a child, or in today's world right now, ordinary Ukrainians picking up arms to defend their country. They are heroes. Those of us who are living with disabilities are just that. We're living our lives. Having a disability is neither tragic nor inspirational. We're not suffering victims for whom you should feel sorry. We're not helpless, dependent children, nor are we super crips who need to show the world that we can do it all. And besides, it's pretty hard to live up to other people's expectations of you. People with disabilities want to be defined by who they are, by who they are and what they do. And they definitely are not special. A word about that term special a little bit later. The world wouldn't be impressed if you got up in the morning, got your children off to school, had breakfast, straightened the house, went to work, bought groceries, drove to pick up your kids after school, came home and made dinner, et cetera, et cetera. But if someone with a disability does that, they're considered exceptional. The underlying and internalized belief is one of incredulity, really of inability. Wow, how could she do that? How could she possibly do that? So now you'll see a slide of the barriers in a disabling world. It's important to remember that disability is a reality and there are things that people can't do. Sticking with the wheelchair image, I have a physical disability due to the impairment of quadriplegia, which is something that I got when I broke my neck. But I'm handicapped by an environment, see that little arrow up there, by an environment that has man-made barriers that could be changed. For example, the building I live in finally installed an automatic door so that I can go in and out by myself rather than having to bang on the glass and wait for the doorman to come and let me in. That's good. And there's another automatic door that was put in recently to get to the outdoor deck and grill. But before I can get to that deck, I still have to go through 3 interior doors that I need to push or pull open. That makes my getting out there difficult and inaccessible, especially if I'm carrying food out to the grill. Then there's the building next door, where every public door has an automatic opener. That's access. It's a huge difference in my being independent and in my quality of life. Incorporating what's called universal design into architectural building plans or renovations, how governments consider our rights and needs when passing new laws, how people with disabilities are included in education, and how clinicians approach the care of their patients with complex disabilities make the world accessible to all and add to our collective richness and diversities. Here's a question for you. Why do grocery stores and airports have sliding doors? Think about that. Why do they have sliding doors? They didn't put in those sliding doors for me or anybody else using a wheelchair or crutches or a walker. They put them in because people going into airports are carrying luggage, and people going into or out of grocery stores have groceries, right? So it's for the entire world. And that's what universal design is all about. Everybody can do it. And I'm thinking about ramps and that strollers and bicycles can utilize, or anybody pushing the luggage on wheels. It's so easy and everybody can use it. And switched for a moment in terms of communication barriers, switch to the image of hearing loss. The same thing. Captioning gives me the opportunity to participate because I can hear what anybody is saying. And Amber uses ASL interpreters. And when those things are provided, we're both good to go. So there are attitudinal barriers, organizational barriers, communication barriers, and environmental barriers. A word about Special Olympics versus Paralympics. Special Olympics athletic games for people with intellectual disabilities were started in 1968 in Chicago by Eunice Kennedy Shriver. One thing they do, however, is they treat disabled people as children. think about muscular dystrophy and the Muscular Dystrophy Association that was started, and the telethons that were started by Jerry Lewis. He was very happy patting adults with intellectual disability and MDA on the head, so treating them as children. The Paralympics is for athletes with disabilities. It started out mostly physical, began in 1960 in Rome, Italy. They are at a very elite level and highly competitive, and originally were started and organized for World War II veterans in 1948 at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Great Britain. And the Paralympics treat the disabled people as adults. Society and disability is an issue that comes up all the time. People with disabilities have repeatedly been bombarded by messages that say their bodies are defective and that they need to be fixed or cured. And as I mentioned a moment ago, they're often treated as children who need to be taken care of. But leaders in the disability rights movement have constructed two distinct models of how society views disabilities: the medical model and the social model. These models provide a framework for how people perceive and interact with those. We're not quite ready for that yet. Almost, that's all right, leave that up. How people perceive and interact with those of us with disabilities. While the medical model is a helpful way of understanding illness and loss of body function, people in the disability community have largely rejected it in favor of the social model. Okay, Beth, next slide, please. Thank you. So here are two slides that show you the differences between the medical model and on the left and the social model on the right. If you take a look at these models, the one on the left has the arrows pointing in. And where does the problem lie? It lies in the disabled person. On the right, however, in the social model of disability, the problem is the disabling world that's out there. The social model promotes the idea that adapting social and physical environments, I mentioned captioning and ASL earlier, to accommodate people with a range of functional abilities improves quality of life and opportunity. The hallmark of the social model is consumer control. Consumer control. It wrests the decision-making process away from the professional and gives it to the person with the disability. It changes the dynamic of how we view and talk about disability and how we address problems or issues such as, who's the agent of change? Who's the decision maker in decisions that need to be made that affect people with disabilities? The medical model says it's the medical professional. The social model says the agent of change is the consumer, the individual with a disability. This paradigm, it just really shifts the paradigm. And it's one of independence, adult thinking, and control, as well as responsibility. So we are responsibility for ourselves and how we are treated and the effects of change. My friend and colleague, Carol Gill, offers this description of the 5 key differences between the two models, and I'm going to read them quickly for you. The medical model says disability is a deficiency, an abnormality, a defect or aberration within the individual, that people are disabled by their impairments or differences, whereas the social model says that disability is a difference, just as a person's gender, age, or race is a difference. 2, the medical model says that having a disability is negative. In other words, what's wrong with you? Whereas the social model says that having a disability is neutral. It's a part of who you are. Third, the medical model says the disability is in you and it's your problem and your responsibility to effect it. Whereas the social model says that disability exists in the interaction between the individual and society. Disability issues stem from someone with a disability, however, trying to function in an inaccessible world. 4, the medical model tries to remedy disability through a medical cure or trying to make the person appear less disabled or more, quote, normal. Whereas the social model says that the remedy is a change in the interaction between the individual and society. So when society changes, the issue of a person with a disability disappear. If a building, for example, if a building is fully accessible, it doesn't matter if a person walks in, runs in, or comes in using a wheelchair or a walker. And finally, the 5th one is the medical model says that the fix is found in the professional. The only person who can help a person with a disability fit into society and be accepted is that professional. The social model says that the fix can be found within the individual or anyone who wants people with disabilities to be equally included in society. And that actually means even you. I want to mention one more model, the tragedy/charity model of disability, which use disability as a burden or a problem to be solved by the non-disabled. This approach depicts people with disabilities as being objects of charity, think of MDA, victims of circumstance, and deserving pity that only perpetuates negative attitudes and stereotypes. This model, by the way, along with the medical model, are the most common models used by non-disabled people to define and explain disability. It's an oppressive and paternalistic model of disability. So let's talk a little bit about ableism and what it is. Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical disabilities are superior. Like racism and sexism, ableism classifies entire groups of people as less than, and it includes harmful language and stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalizations. Inclusive language is a key tool in confronting ableism and its entrenched manifestations. Here are a few examples of ableism. Segregating students with disabilities into separate schools. Failing to incorporate accessibility into building design plans. The mass murder of disabled people in Nazi Germany. Choosing an inaccessible venue for a meeting or event. Casting a non-disabled actor to play a disabled character. Making a movie that doesn't have audio description or closed captioning. Another example, using the accessible bathroom stall when you don't need to. I find that all the time. I wait, and then somebody comes out from the accessible stall and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But they wouldn't have had to say that if they'd used the other stalls that were easily available to them. Speaking of or for a disabled person rather than letting them speak for themselves. Using disabled only parking spaces or seats on the bus or train when you don't need to. A few words about language and avoiding some labels and stereotypes. You can take that slide down, Beth. I don't think we need any more slides right now. We'll wait for this. So avoiding some labels and stereotypes. They reflect and reinforce our perceptions and misperceptions of others. Language that's inclusive and that celebrates diversity reinforces the humanity in all of us. Disability, as I said before, is not an illness or a disease or a problem that needs to be fixed. Words do matter. There's a difference, and I want you to think about this. There's a difference between impairment, disability, and handicap. Impairment refers to a problem with a structure or organ of the body. Disability is a functional limitation with regard to a particular activity. Handicap refers to an environmental factor that prevents the filling of a usual life role. Some terms like inspiring or inspirational imply a hierarchy, and it sets up people with disabilities as better than you, overcoming difficulty or tragedy. And I mentioned earlier sort of that, oh, I could never do or think that, or I could never do or think what she does. And it puts people up on a pedestal. But a role model or mentor is an equal who has learned some coping skills and how to navigate particular situations. People aren't heroic, nor pitiful, nor worse or better than others. Words such as wheelchair bound, bed bound, confined to a wheelchair, special, afflicted, defective, deformed or deformity, normal or abnormal, victim, deaf, mute, deaf and dumb, restricted, stricken, cripple, except when used by people with disabilities themselves, because they have reclaimed their identity. Those are words that are actually quite offensive to those of us who have disabilities. Handicap, why is that not used anymore? Handicap or handicap doesn't describe a person with a disability. It's great for golf or horse racing or an environmental barrier. It is not an appropriate term for people with disabilities. I mentioned earlier that inclusive language is a key tool in confronting ableism and its entrenched manifestations. People with disabilities are not superhuman. Descriptions such as courageous and brave, or as having overcome your disability, portrays people as children. They're patronizing, condescending, and oppressive. I mentioned at my opening about the difference between senior citizen and old. These are that's a euphemism. It's a condescending red flag, and it's intended to put a more positive spin on the words they replace. However, what they really are is a denial of reality and a way to avoid talking about disability. So, employees are not fixed, they are let go. Animals are not euthanized, they are, quote, put to sleep. Then again, euthanize really is a euphemism for kill. Think about that. Humans don't die. We don't say humans die, we say they pass away. And according to President Putin, the invasion of Ukraine is a, quote, special operation, not a military attack. So the term special needs, which I mentioned earlier, is a perfect example of a euphemism because some people consider it less harsh or unpleasant than disabled or handicapped. But the fact is, it's also condescending and patronizing. Here's an actual quote from a mother of a disabled child. She said, it's less harsh than the reality of disabled. I prefer the term special needs because I feel it's a little bit less derogatory. And a father of a disabled individual wrote, quote, special needs sounds more positive than disability. So most alternative terms reflect the idea, the misguided idea, that disability needs to be softened. So using these cute terms will make a disability more palatable. But remember, do you remember when we were afraid to say the word cancer out loud? So what did we call it? The big C. Or we whispered it. I'm sure some of you remember it, as if we said the word cancer, it was going to be contagious. Words like differently abled, handy-capable, mobility challenged are cringeworthy. Disability challenged, well, what can I say about that? We're all challenged in one way or another, aren't we? My biggest challenge is getting up in the morning. That's the ultimate challenge for me. Getting older is a challenge. I try to think that the wrinkles on my face are a reminder and a gift of a life well lived. But frankly, I don't believe it. It's one heck of a challenge getting older, and I fight it every day. So as I mentioned earlier, the thought is really just a euphemistic spin for being old. We're almost finished. Disability is a part of life and human diversity, not something to be dramatized and sensationalized. When disability is not portrayed realistically, messages of pity and shame are often conveyed, and they take the form of these inspirational stories of people with disabilities accomplishing basic everyday tasks. Other messages highlight people's fears about becoming disabled and convey notions of weakness, dependence, helplessness, perhaps even abandonment. And now, the nothing about us without us. Anybody know what centers for independent living are? There are more than 400 centers in the US. They are controlled by people with disabilities. They're consumer controlled. They're led and run by a majority of people with disabilities and a board that is comprised of a majority of people with disabilities. They're not residential or nursing or assisted living facilities. The 4 core services that they provide are individual and systems advocacy, information and referral, independent living skills training, and peer support. I'd like to offer you a few suggestions. An accommodation is a change that improves access. When you're advertising your program, ask if any accommodation is needed, what specifically is needed, and mention the date you need that information by. For example, if you need an accommodation, please call by such and such a date. When planning events, consider accessibility needs before choosing a location, even if you don't think any people with disabilities will attend. When discussing plans or making decisions, people with disabilities need to be at the table, so include them. Treat adults as adults. A wheelchair is a part of an individual's personal body space, not a place for anyone to rest your arm, leg, or coat on. And don't touch the joystick of a power chair because you could get some broken toes or feet. My closing thought, my dear, dear friend and colleague, internationally renowned disability rights leader, Marka Bristow, would acknowledge her disability every year by saying, today I'm celebrating the 25th anniversary of my disability. She didn't look at it as a negative. What a joy to have known her. Sadly, she died in 2019. And my final thought, as a disabled writer and scholar, Alison Kafer says, to eliminate disability is to eliminate the possibility of discovering alternative ways of being in the world, to foreclose the possibility of recognizing and valuing our interdependence. Beth is going to pull up later a lot of websites not a lot, but a few websites that I have given her that I think are very good. So with that, I'm turning it over to Amber. I've utilized some of Amber's time and I apologize. Or turn it back to you, Beth. Thank you all for listening so intently.
And as we saw last night,
Yeah.
do that. Ginger, this is stunning and given us so much to integrate and to think about. I just thank you. I'm going to open it to questions. I'm all for Mish today, so I'm looking for all the things that you sent me. I will be getting them. Raise your hand if you have a question. Jill, I can see you. Can you monitor any chats, any questions in the chat that people have? Also, Linda Caskell, if you have a question about hearing, she's in the audience and has worked with Amber. So
it looks like Merle has a question.
I just want to make a statement. My sister is Thea Flom, and I think Ginger and
Thea, yes.
And I'm certain that you included the facingdisabilities.com website on your list, Ginger.
Yes.
So, we have a family member, so we learned long ago that we never talk down. This is just a renewal of reminder for me and a whole new vocabulary for many others. Thank you.
My pleasure. In fact, Vicki and I were just on a program together last week, so it was great to reconnect with her.
Right. So Vicki is my sister's stepdaughter. My sister Thea Flom's stepdaughter, and Vicki Kowalski, who married what is referred to as an able-bodied man. And Vicki had a baby years after. She actually, you know, Vicki's a grandmother now. So, and my sister, I think, was the suggester of the new name of the of RIC to the Ability Lab.
I know that excessive access, thank you, Merle. Yes, I will definitely include that. Access living, Amber has not joined us. But she works at Access Living, which does amazing things. And this is where Ginger retired from. And they track legislation that's come up. And I think I put some of it in the reminder that I sent. If you sign up for Access Living on their advocacy site, you'll be getting current on all the things that are happening. Linda Caskell, I'm going to ask you, is there anything you'd like to add to this? Because I know that you work.
There is. I wanted to thank Ginger. But 30 years after the passage of ADA, I think we can't realize that the work is not done. You're able to use the bus, but you're not able to still use all of the CTA stations that are in the city or the metro stations. And I think we need to think about that, how long it's been. And I wonder if you want to talk about some of the disability justice work that's going on and continuing the work of the ADA.
Well, that's what you bring up, a very important point, but I don't think I can really speak intelligently about the disability justice work that is occurring, because I'm not really up on it, on the latest things, except to say that I definitely agree with you. I mean, for many years, I traveled a lot to Washington, D.C., and found, even though they had installed elevators to get down to the subway, half the time the elevators were broken. That occurs on buses as well. I'll be sitting at the bus stop, although I live 7 minutes from downtown, so now it's wonderful to hop on the bus. But sometimes the bus says, I'm sorry, the ramp isn't working. So then we're stuck. But I can't really, I don't want to speak specifically to the disability justice work that is occurring, but it is ongoing. And it is kind of appalling to me how people fight against it, as if they're never going to become disabled and need some of the things that are being done. Well, I have news for everybody in the world. At some point, everybody is going to have some type of disability. At some point, it may be temporary, it may become permanent, but it's going to be there. And I just have to give a shout out and really applaud what happened last night at the Academy Awards. The wonderful award that was given for supporting actor. I can't remember, Troy. And anyway, the disabled actor who was deaf. And did you notice when Coda was given Best Picture, did you notice that there was someone, a sign language interpreter, standing down it more facing the recipients? Does anybody know why? Linda.
It's Marley Matlin's interpreter. She had to be able to understand it, not just all the people viewing it. We needed 2 interpreters.
That's exactly right. And the same thing for Troy, so that they could understand what was being said, because they were reading the interpreter. I see, Julie, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you spoke about, you spoke a lot about the words we should not use, special needs and these sugar coating, which I know I was sort of not overtly, but sort of covertly taught, that's a kinder way of saying things. So that was a really helpful lesson. But I guess I'm still not clear on what words we should use. I mean, I definitely got your message, call a spade a spade. Old is old, wheelchair is wheelchair, blind is blind, deaf is deaf.
Right,
I just use the words, is there is the word disability, that's a preferred word over special need or, differently abled or whatever, I don't know which terms are preferred, or do you just use the closest literal term you can think of?
It's always evolving, and some people prefer, I mean, there's a whole segment of people, primarily parents of those with intellectual disabilities, who like and embrace the term special needs. Those of us in the disability rights movement don't happen to like that term. But I feel that, and it's been evolving, disability has become, handicap used to be the accepted term for people with disabilities. We've moved away from that. But special needs is that sugarcoating. It's one thing you can do that really helps is to ask the person with whom you are in touch. So you come across upon me and you say, what term do you like, Ginger? What works for you? Don't be afraid to ask. That's one mistake that we all make. We think, well, I don't want to embarrass somebody. The only person you're going to embarrass is yourself. Don't be afraid of embarrassing yourself. You don't know, ask. Does that help you at all?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Good.
Amy Kleinman has a question.
Thank you. I'm curious to know, Ginger, what you think of the movie Crip Camp, because I found it so educational. Like, I had just not been aware of how long everything took and how recent some of these, laws and improvements are, and just the challenges that were faced. And I just found it a very educational film. So I'm curious to know what you think of it.
I met Judy Heumann, who has become a friend of longstanding. I met Judy Heumann back. See, I became disabled in '84, so I probably met her in '85 or '86. She's an incredible person. Crip Camp is a fabulous movie that I encourage you all to see. If you have the chance. It's about these young people who, many of whom were institutionalized. And all they wanted to do, then they were young, some were teenagers, some were in their 20s. So what do teenagers think about and talk about? Sex, right? They wanted to do what teenagers do. And they went to this camp, and it was the first time that they were able to be themselves. And out of that, and they did need assistance, personal assistance. And they had helpers who helped them with their activities of daily living, and made life so that these people could be like anybody else and have a fantastic experience of going to camp. And it was segregated in the sense, but this was back in the early 70s, it was segregated in the sense that it was created for people with disabilities. But I really encourage you to see it. It is great. Judy Heumann has become, and even at that time, a fantastic disability rights activist. And I hate to think of what the world would be like without her. So I hope she lives absolutely forever and ever and ever, just the way I hope Marka would. But it didn't happen.
Mom, I have to interrupt and share with everybody that you have a cameo in the film Crip Camp. So if you haven't seen the movie, if you blink, you might miss Mom, but she's in it.
I forgot about that.
Wow.
And it was because I was demonstrating for the ADA.
Nice.
I absolutely loved getting arrested. I called my husband, who was back in Chicago, and I said, "Oh my gosh, 104 of us got arrested. What can you do about that?" He said, "Oh, you got arrested? Good, stay there."
Funny.
Oh, my husband was a lawyer. He said, "Stay there. You'll learn something." And we had to go to the judge the next day to court, and guess where the court was? Up about
Upstairs.
100 steps.
Oh, how could,
Oh,
terrible.
it was so ridiculous. And we
Yeah.
made them come down, and but
Oh,
it was great.
Marcia, I
Um,
thought you had a question.
Merle, did you have another question?
I do have a question. I will lower
Oh,
my hand. My question is that many years ago, because now my granddaughters are all at least teenagers, and I don't remember which one it was, but we had a field trip from the school to Access Living. And there were some stunning presentations given, wonderful talks and raising questions, even though I think these were 4th or 5th graders, very little, but really bright and aware children. And one of the things that came to my attention, which I had been totally unaware of, and I haven't kept up with it, was that the federal government allows a lower wage to be paid to employees. So what is the standing for that now, Ginger? Or Linda, or anybody who can answer?
It's still sometimes it happens. It's gotten better, but let me give you a broad explanation. Discrimination still exists. It's never going to go away. And so it's a constant fight. And even though there are laws on the books, there are ways to get around them. But if you learn the law and what your rights are, you can fight them. So paying a person with a disability a lower wage or a lower salary than someone who is non-disabled is absolutely against the law. And you can definitely take that to court. Right, Marcia?
Right.
So when did that finally change? I know that the laws were written, but attempting to encourage the employment of individuals with disabilities. So
Well, it certainly came about through the ADA and even before. I mean, in 1973, you had the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, but I don't think that covered employment. Do you happen to know, Marcia?
No, I'm not sure.
You know what? Call Access Living. Really, Access Living. I was employed by Access Living for 31 years, but I headed up peer counseling and then disability arts and culture. So I was not, but Amber certainly knows, and other people
thank you.
would know. It's your best resource, by the way, in Chicago, as well as Facing Disability, which is another fantastic resource for if you're interested.
Oh, okay. Linda Levy, you have a question?
I have a quick question. Can you give us an update on the Momenta dance group, what they're doing now?
Momenta Dance Company is still thriving,
Wonderful.
alive and doing well, and I'm consulting with them. We have some other projects going on. There's, by the way, this year, 2022, is the year of Chicago dance. I encourage everyone to go and see a dance performance. Integrated dance is alive and well.
That's so fantastic.
Yeah, and there's going to be at the Museum of Contemporary Art, the MCA, Alice Shepard is coming, and Alice and Laurel will be doing a piece called Wired. It's phenomenal.
Wow.
So everybody go and see it the beginning of May.
I love her. When is that? Beginning of May?
I think it's May, oh boy, May 3rd and 4th or 3rd.
I'll
to
look it up.
5th.
Yeah.
I'll
Just
include
so
that.
fun, Ginger, didn't you start this dance company? It's an amazing performing art. You started Momenta, didn't you, Ginger?
No, I did not start Momenta. I started, while I was still at Access Living, I started an annual integrated dance concert, and I called it Counterbalance. And it was, we had some dancers from Momenta. I was also a company member of Momenta and a choreographer for Momenta. And like, the disability world is kind of a small world, and we engage people to work with us. But Stephanie Clemens, who was the artistic director of Momenta, has retired and moved to New Mexico just this year. But there's a lot happening.
It's a very dynamic experience to see Momenta. I couldn't believe how fascinating it was, because we think of using your feet as dancing, but it's really movement in general, and to see movement on so many different levels. And I have to tell you, Ginger is my ballet teacher, but it's incredible.
Agreed. Thank
Best ballet teacher you ever had, right, Jan?
you.
May I ask a question? Oh,
Yeah, Beverly, go ahead.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about PACE. I'm looking it up and they're saying that 51% of the employees and, are involved, are people with challenges. Do you know, can you tell us a little bit about that? You mentioned an organization. Hello, can you hear me? You mentioned an organization that is primarily composed of the community of advocates and also people that are living, day to day with challenges. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then I guess my second question is PACE involved in that community as well?
Okay, I need to go back, Beverly, to your first question. Can you, I wasn't reading my captioning, I'm sorry, so I didn't quite hear you.
I'm not. Okay, I wanted, number one, can you tell us about PACE? I'm looking up PACE, and according to their website, 51% of the people involved, staff and donors, and are individuals with disabilities. I hate the word, but whatever. That's my first question.
Why do you hate that word? People with disabilities is a perfect word.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I've always found, I had an autistic brother and he was called handicapped, and and later on I thought that the term individuals with disabilities was a little less stigmatizing, you know what I mean? But yeah, but that's sort of how, but I was wondering about, so in other words, we should use the words, we shouldn't fudge them, we shouldn't be uncomfortable with them, we should just speak them because,
Beverly, you've just, I'm so glad you brought that up, because actually that's what my 25-minute talk, which turned into 40 minutes, was really all about. You just brought up the actually good word. You said, saying somebody with a disability, you wanted to be careful about what language you use because it could be stigmatizing.
Right.
What is wrong with the term disability? If a person has a disability, they have a disability. This stigmatizing means that it's bad.
Mhm.
Is it really bad to have a disability?
No, you're just calling the truth. You're just being honest.
Exactly. And the fact that you have a relative with autism,
Yeah, he died.
doesn't make that individual any less worthy
No.
or any more elevated or special. That person's an
Absolutely.
individual.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So we want to treat all people, whatever, Black, brown, Asian, deaf, disabled, we want to treat everyone with dignity and recognize the humanity and individuality of each individual. Having autism is having autism, period.
Right.
So don't think about not attaching a value judgment
Mm-hmm.
to a disability, because everyone is of value.
Oh, sure.
Take nothing else away from our little talk this evening.
Well, it was a great,
That everyone has value.
right. I guess what I was really trying to get to was, you mentioned an organization that is composed primarily of people in the community that have a disability. And I think that that's great because I'm so, you know what I mean? If you could speak to us, you mentioned it. in your talk.
Centers for Independent Living is
Okay,
what she mentioned.
okay, yes. Do
Thank
you mind? Do you have time?
That's access living. That's access living. Access living is not a residential facility.
No, right.
It is an organization that is primarily or more than 50% of the employees are people with disabilities. They work on behalf of teaching independent living skills, of advocacy, of legislation
Mhm.
to benefit people with disabilities. And they are a community that engages in these activities, but it is not a residential facility.
No, no. They're
Okay.
on Chicago. No, I was just gonna say, I think it's, I wish that there were more organizations like that where individuals could speak for themselves and not be, you know what I mean, and not have the value judgments of clinicians and so on. So, yeah,
Well, there
like
are
to-
400 in the United States, more than 400. So there are
Okay.
plenty of
Oh,
them
great.
around.
All right, well, thank you so much for your talk. It
Of
was
course.
terrific.
This is wonderful. I'm going to give a quick preview of our next spotlight, which is on another powerful traffic program, sex trafficking. Can it happen to people like us? And the Associate Executive Director of Zacharias Sexual Abuse Center, Wendy Ivy, is going to be speaking along with Sarah Manowith, the Director of Response for Teens. And this too will be dynamic. Ginger, this is so enlightening for all of us. We are so grateful to have you part of our community and to have you share with us. Just thank you so very, very much.
Well,
And I will be
thank-
following.
You were
appreciate
amazing,
it. I thank
Ginger.
all of
Thank you.
Yeah,
And-
yeah.
But most of
And
all,
I
I
will
thank
send-
you all for paying such close attention and wanting to know more and wanting to engage. And I think my biggest the biggest message I can give to all of you and to all of us is don't be afraid.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you for that permission. Thank you for everything, Ginger.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
wonderful. And we're going to include this in all of our additional programming, whatever the topic. There's a key to the disability. And thank you for the idea. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, that's terrific.
So if anyone has any other questions, write them to me and we'll get them answered. And thank you again. And thank you everyone for attending. So
Bye, Ginger. Thank you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.